Welcome to the Pucks with Haggs podcast, powered by Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network. I believe this is the 99th episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. I am your host, Joe Haggerty. You can find my work at joehaggerty.substack.com. Sign up for a premium membership. You get all of my NHL and Bruins writing sent straight directly to your inbox. I also file columns for the Boston Sports Journal, so you can find all of my Bruins writing over at bostonsportsjournal.com with some fine sports journalists like Greg Bedard, Mike Giardi, and a cast of thousands on that staff. So check that out as well. It's going to be a mailbag episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast this week. So we're going to be answering your questions. And there's plenty of them going on right now with the offseason in full effect. Let's get to the mailbag questions because, honestly, there isn't a ton of news this week. As far as the Bruins go, I think the biggest news was just a little bit of a change in the coaching staff. We have a question about that later, but I'll just run down the nuts and bolts of it right now. Basically, the Bruins hired Jay Leach from the Seattle Kraken. He was an assistant coach with the Kraken the last couple of years. Prior to that, he was the head coach of the Providence Bruins before Ryan Muginel for about 5 or 6 years. Very highly thought of in the Bruins organization. He was actually considered for the head coaching job that Jim Montgomery ended up getting a couple of years ago. And now he's going to join the staff, be on the bench as an assistant, along with Chris Kelly and Joe Sacco, who has been bumped to associate coach, which is a promotion for him as well. Well-deserved. Joe Sacco has been here a long time, been here before. Jim Montgomery was a member of Bruce Cassidy's staff as well. And John McLean, who was an assistant coach on the bench last year, is going to be moved to the player development department where he's going to be the skating and skills coach. And basically, for John McLean, I think it was great that he got the year of experience on the Bruins bench. He got the assistant coaching experience with Jim Montgomery. But he was a guy that his background is skating and skills. That's what he's been doing for a long time. That's why where he was initially hired by the organization was to be basically the skating and skills coach for the NHL team. John McLean there and Tom Ford, who's one of his partners at Dynamic Skating, a great hockey camp that they run in the summertime for your kids. If you have youth hockey players up at Merrimack, my son Finn's gone. Multiple summers to them. Kim Brandvold, John McLean, Tommy Ford, they all run it together. It's fantastic. Dynamic Skating, look it up. But those guys do skating and skills with the Bruins. Tommy Ford works more with the guys in Providence and elsewhere in the prospects and other people in the Bruins organization. And John McLean had been working with the NHL guys. Now they're going to expand John McLean to work with more young players, prospects, in addition to the Bruins players. He was also a guy that I think was instrumental working with the medical staff to get players up and running and back ready to play. So it makes sense, I think, for all involved. And the interesting part is that Jay Leach is a guy that I think the Bruins, like I said before, have viewed as having head coaching potential. I think he's viewed around the league as a rising star or a rising guy, a rising head coach in the making that is eventually going to be a head coach at the NHL level. So he comes on the staff with that, that resume now. And he really did a good job in Seattle under Dave Hextall. So he comes to the Bruins staff under Jim Montgomery and is, let's call it like it is, right? He's potentially an option as a head coach for the Boston Bruins in-house if they ever decided that coaching change was needed. I'm not saying that Jim Montgomery's on the hot seat. I'm not saying that the Bruins are considering this right now. I'm just saying they now have that option if it ever came to that point. And from what I've been told, Jim Montgomery signed a 3-year contract when he was hired, and this is year number 3 that he's going into, and I have not heard anything about any kind of contract extension for Jim Montgomery. Certainly there's been no news about that from the Boston Bruins. So potentially it seems like Jim Montgomery may be going into this last year, in the last year of his contract. And now there is somebody on his staff who the Bruins view as a potential head coaching candidate and somebody that, they were interested in when they hired Jim Montgomery. So I think the dynamics of that are going to be interesting and something to watch. And I think you can't argue with the success that Jim Montgomery's had during the regular season. I think he's done a lot of great things. He's been a great coach for this team. He's taken them and said he everything he said he was going to do. The Bruins have done. But you also can't deny that they have not performed as well in the playoffs as they have during the regular season. Offense was a definite issue for that team this postseason. The 7 too many men in the ice penalties not good, and something that is problematic and needs to be fixed, and that's a reflection of the players and the coaches. So I think there are areas that the Bruins, of course, would like to see tightened up with the team, with the coaching, with everything. And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out this year. So that kind of sets up for an interesting situation with Jay Leach now on board and on the staff. Obviously, I think Jim Montgomery is happy to have him. I think it's going to strengthen their NHL coaching staff and make them even better this coming season. So that's great. And we'll see how it all works together. But just something to watch. And that is definitely, I think, the most interesting thing that happened this week moving forward. But the bottom line is the Bruins upgraded their coaching staff, I think, by bringing Jay Leach on board, a guy that is very good working with young players, has a history with a lot of the young Bruins players on this team, having worked with them in Providence, and is viewed and valued that way around the league. Obviously, him getting hired by the Seattle Kraken as an NHL assistant, he's highly thought of around the league. So good move by the Bruins. Good move by Don Sweeney, picking up on Seattle changing out their coaches, firing Dave Hextall and the assistants, and Jay Leach having a place to go in Boston. All right. So let's look at the questions here. From Mr. Ed 315. What should be priorities by Bruins management for the draft, free agency, and the rest of the offseason? The priorities, as I see them, should be I think the number one priority is to sign Jeremy Swayman. I think that's the most important thing that they have to do. Not only to lock him up, not only to reward him for a great breakout season where, he would have been the Conn Smythe favorite if they had somehow made it to the Stanley Cup Finals, was the best goalie in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, and kind of showed that he's a number one goaltender. But I think you also need to get cost certainty with his contract and know exactly what you're going to be paying him so you can roll out the rest of your off season and know how much money you have to spend elsewhere and how much money you have for free agency, for making trades, for all that stuff. The only way you can do that is by getting cost certainty with Jeremy Swayman. So I think that is absolutely paramount that they get that done in the next week, 10 days, if they can. You want to get it done prior to July 1st because it's going to hamper your ability to spend and know exactly how much you have to spend in free agency to improve the team and get these other players if you don't know how much Jeremy Swayman is going to cost you. So I think that's number one. Number two is primary scoring, getting primary scoring. Don Sweeney mentioned in his press conference, the end of season press conference, a couple of times that the Bruins needed secondary scoring. They needed to add secondary scoring to what they already have. They averaged 2.38 goals per game during the playoffs. It was one of the worst. They were one of the worst offensive teams in the playoffs. Obviously, they got to the end of the second round because their goaltending was phenomenal and Swayman was unbelievable. But it was not because they were scoring goals and they were creating offense. And I think they need another primary offense, goal scorer, high event player, guy that makes things happen, guy that can be effective in the playoffs. They need somebody else that can, be somebody the other teams have to worry about shutting down offensively. Pasternak needs help there. And they have the money to get it. They need to overpay for somebody that they can bring in that can be another primary scorer, another guy that can drive a line with his offense, that can make things happen for his other teammates, make everybody around him better because he's that good an offensive player. And I really think that's the massive, big priority. They could also use, I think, another defenseman, a big, strong, mean, stay-at-home type, a guy that can throw people around. They could use certainly they're going to need a Pat Maroon type on this team too. If it's not Pat Maroon, somebody to add that's big, strong, tough, intimidating, a bottom six type. But they could also get that later on in the year. They've gotten that at the trade deadline the last couple of years, those kind of players. And I think that's sort of been their MO. I think that for the Bruins is that, they try to develop that during the year. And if they don't have it, they can get it at the trade deadline. They may continue to do that. But I just think the rest of the offseason definitely needs to be about improving the offense and bringing another finisher, whether it's Sam Reinhart or somebody else, via free agency or a trade. They need to bring in somebody that can be effective putting the puck in the net, make everybody around them better, just make things happen offensively and in a primary way, not in a secondary way. They have enough third, fourth line types, guys that can be bottom six players, guys that can maybe pop in 15 to 20 goals. Like, they have a ton of those guys. That is not something they need more of. They have enough of those kind of players. What they need is somebody that can be a 30-plus goal scorer, a guy that the other team worries about shutting down and is concerned about and knows they have to, put great defenders on and really, check them during the game. That's the kind of player. They need another one of those to take some of the pressure off Marchand and Pastrnak to always be those guys. So I think that's the biggest thing they have to get, and another defenseman. They could certainly use another forward, like a big, strong forward. They could use more size, more grit, more meanness, more physicality at the forward position as well. And, if you could get that with the primary scorer, that's awesome. Roll it all into one package. But, if you don't get that, if it's more of a Sam Reinhart type, you are going to need to go out and get somebody that can be a bit of an intimidator in the bottom six. But bottom line is I feel like they need to get 2 or 3 impact players in this offseason in order to turn this team from a good team, a playoff team, a team that has good regular seasons, and that is not quite as good in the playoffs and is not a threat to a team like Florida. They need 2 or 3 impact players to bring them in order to become a team that Florida legitimately has to worry about, that can beat Florida, that can be a legit Stanley Cup contender for the next 5 to 10 years. If Don Sweeney makes all the right moves, hits double, triples, home runs with these free agent signings, hopefully, for the fans, more triples and home runs than doubles. But if he hits hard with these free agent signings and what he does this offseason with the salary cap space, they could set themselves up for a 5 to 10 year run as a legit premium Stanley Cup contender that everybody's going to have to worry about. But it comes down to Don Sweeney and the Bruins really hitting it this offseason with the $20 million they have in salary cap space. They can't miss. They can't have a guy that a David Backes type signing. They need to hit on all of these guys.
Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. The way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less than on 2 or more player stats for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. With Prize Picks, you could turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. Whether it's playoff basketball, whether it's Major League Baseball, soon enough, football will be here in the fall. But you can make a Prize Picks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're totally locked in. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Picks has got you covered every week, from lowering select player stats projections on Tuesdays, which increases your chances of getting a win, to getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's download the Prize Picks app today. Super easy to use, easy to download. And use the code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
All right. Next question. Ray Garino. Is there a Matthew Tkachuk type trade out there the Bruins could make where they move a significant core piece plus other assets for a player that can improve their club considerably? Perhaps an RFA or pending RFA UFA, and they can then extend. Okay. Here's the player. If I'm fantasy projecting a player that would be perfect for the Bruins, a player that would be everything that they need and then some, a player that could have a Matthew Tkachuk type impact on their team, just as Matthew Tkachuk did with the Florida Panthers, where he took them from, a team that won the President's Trophy, a talented team that was 1-0 in the playoffs, took them to the Stanley Cup Finals the next year, based a lot on his impact and his leadership and what he brings to the table, in addition to the team maturing around him. You know who that player is that the Boston Bruins could go after in a fantasy world to make them better like that? It's another Tkachuk. It's Matthew Tkachuk's brother, Brady Tkachuk, 24-year-old with the Ottawa Senators, 6'4", 220 pounds. Meaner than Matthew Tkachuk, more of a bully than Matthew Tkachuk, more of a guy that will stand toe-to-toe, throw punches against you and really beat you up than Matthew Tkachuk. Somebody in the comments called the Florida Panthers a bunch of cul-de-sac tough guys. Matthew Tkachuk, I think, you could describe him as that, and I think everybody knows what that commenter was talking about. Brady Tkachuk is a legit NHL tough guy. He is a guy that strikes fear into other teams and players, is huge and strong and physical and dirty, mean, nasty, can back it all up. And, oh, by the way, he scored 30-plus goals the last 3 seasons. He's been over 60, 70, 80 points the last 3 seasons, been well over 100 penalty minutes the last 3-4 seasons, has legit turned into the kind of power forward unicorn that just grows on that doesn't grow on trees, that you don't see anymore in the NHL. Throwback player. Like, that is what the Boston Bruins need. In a fantasy world, that is what they would go after. That's what they would give up, I think, a significant roster piece in order to get. He's $8.2 million salary cap hit for the next, I think he's signed for the next like 3 or 4 years. So you get some cost certainty there. That's certainly an amount you would pay for a player like that. But it also means that, it's going to cost a lot to get that player. And it's going to cost you somebody significant on your roster. Now, it's tough. Would you entertain trading a guy like David Pastrnak to get Brady Tkachuk? Would you entertain trading a guy like Charlie McAvoy to get Brady Tkachuk? Would you entertain trading Jeremy Swayman to get Brady Tkachuk, if that could get it done? Because the Ottawa Senators badly need a goaltender. And they're one of the teams that might be interested in Linus Ullmark if the Bruins were to trade him. Could you do any of that stuff? Would you do any of that stuff to get Brady Tkachuk? I mean, I think everybody would have to be on the table to be considered if you were going to get a player like that at 24 years old that is so rare in the NHL, fits so well what the traditional identity of the Boston Bruins has been, the Big Bad Bruins, to have a player like that would come in, kick ass, score goals, take names, make things happen. Like, just think about how much of a spectacle and how fun the Bruins-Panthers games have been great anyway. Like, Paul Maurice said this at the end of this playoffs, the second round this year, that he would pay money to watch the Bruins and the Panthers play hockey because it's such good hockey, because it's such intense, physical, like well played, like all that stuff. Everybody would pay to see Brady Tkachuk in a Bruins uniform, Matthew Tkachuk in a Florida Panthers uniform, and them like just go to war with each other a handful of times a year, and in the playoffs potentially too. Are you kidding me? That would be awesome. So like that's the player I look at and say and there's been whispers that maybe he wants out of Ottawa, maybe he's going to get traded, maybe he might be available. If any of that becomes reality, the Bruins have to overpay, act on it, just like throw everything at the Ottawa Senators to try to make that happen, because I think that is the kind of player that puts them over the top. Now, do you have to give up so much that it weakens your team to the point where you're not even the contender that you were? That's something you got to consider, and that's obviously part of the whole thing. But I think getting back to the answer, if there's a trade out there the Bruins can make, give a Matthew Tkachuk type impact to the Bruins like he did with the Panthers, I think it's his brother. I think it's just bringing another Tkachuk into the mix that would have that kind of impact. That's the kind of player the Bruins should be looking for. The problem is there's not a lot of those players out there. All right. From Duke Bruman, best Bruins captain of the last 30 years. This is a tough one. Like, it was a short period of time that Patrice Bergeron was captain. I think he did a great job, and I think he was in many ways kind of he was a captain even when he was the alternate captain and he was wearing the A instead of the C. He acted like a captain, and he was part of, I think, the best leadership group that I've ever seen on any sports team when he and Zdeno Chara were leading the team. I think Brad Marchand did a great job this past year. I think it was a growing year for him, and he kind of figured it out as it was going along and figured out how he could still be himself and not try to be somebody else while being captain. But I think it has to go to Zdeno Chara. What was he captain for? 14, 15 years with the Boston Bruins. One Stanley Cup title in 2011, 3 Stanley Cup finals. They're in the playoffs just about every single year. They had 2 years where they didn't make the playoffs in their back-to-back years, but every other year they were in the playoffs. Tons of division titles, some President's trophies. And really, like, when you look back on it, Zdeno Chara was the best free agent signing in the history of the NHL, the most impactful player that was signed in free agency. That really took the Bruins from the end of the Harry Sin and Mike O'Connell era when they were like struggling big time, and just had dregs on their roster, just a doormat, just not good to watch. Hadn't fully recovered from the Joe Thornton trade and the fallout there. Were obviously not a contender, not even close to it. To him coming in, them struggling a little bit for the first year. They had the wrong coach in Dave Lewis. They were still sort of jettisoning the players that were left over from the previous regime. But then, started to build and immediately became a playoff team the following year and built it back up until they won the cup and stayed at that level through his entire time here. He had an air of accountability with him where everybody knew they had to be at their best, always be in shape, be professional. He wasn't going to accept anything less. He had a stern side to his leadership, but he also, I think, as he grew and matured, relaxed a little bit with that too, and understood that you had to be different things for different people, and you couldn't be like the drill sergeant, demanding everybody do as many pull-ups as him all the time. And I think, by the time they won the cup, I think he'd figured it out. He had found the balance between, being a taskmaster and being somebody that expected the best out of everybody, but also being a guy that knew when to ease off the gas pedal, knew that, that the team needed to cut loose sometimes, and understood that also the vibe of the room, that everybody was part of the team. Everybody was accepted. There were no rookies. There were no labels put on people. He was so vigilant about that everybody had to be treated equal. He did not want young players being treated differently or badly or anything like that. Did not want, people saying, oh, you can't come out with us because you're a rookie, or you can't do this because he did not want any of that. And I think that's what brings players together, teams together, that makes everybody feel like they're a part of it. And he was at the forefront of that and really set the example with that. So best Bruins captain of the last 30 years for me is Zdeno Chara. And I think the results speak for themselves. I don't even think this is a really tough one, but I will say asterisk next to it, best Bruins captain, but he also had Patrice Bergeron, who was also kind of a second captain. It was the two of them together, and that's what made it so good. It was the two of them together as leaders, as unquestioned tone setters, as guys that led by example, as the hardest workers on the team, as very conscientious, good people, setting the tone for everything that was going on with the Bruins. All of that makes a big difference, and all of that is an important part of the success and what happened. So I think Bergeron and Chara go hand in hand, but Chara was the C. Chara was the captain at that time. He was the leader. And he was the unquestioned C. So I think you give it to him. But that's a great question. And maybe we'll ask that one too when we've got a panel here, so everybody can kick it around for a little bit.
Are you excited for the NBA Finals with the Boston Celtics? You should be. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, all kinds of stars. How cool would it be to actually go to one of the games at TD Garden and watch the Celtics? My friends, we've got an option for you. Game Time will help you get those tickets. Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. You pick out any specific games or matchups that you love to attend, and you get good deals for those tickets. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals and on select seats ahead of the game. or event. The all-in pricing feature shows you the total up front with no surprise fees at the checkout. And don't you hate the surprise fees? Props to Game Time for no surprise fees. All right, so take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Okay, Coach Darren9 asks, I seem to remember the Bruins being in contention for John Tavares when he was a free agent before signing with Toronto. Yeah, I seem to remember that too. What are your thoughts on getting him on the cheap from Toronto? Also, are the Bruins using the Centennial jerseys again next year? Man, that is an awesome question. I don't have an answer for the Centennial jerseys question. I will find out, and I will find out and tell everybody on a later podcast. I would say this. I hope they continue to use the Centennial jerseys because I think they're cool. I think they look great, and I think they, rather than – because they had different jerseys the year before too, rather than like doing this every year where they're constantly like going through alternate jerseys and third jerseys and different jerseys that they wear. I think they hit on something great with the Centennial jerseys, and they should, they should wear them for a while until like some other kind of event or celebration or whatever happens that makes them want to do it a little different. And I know it's good for jersey sales to have different alternates every year or every couple of years, whatever, especially if you have the Winter Classic, like stuff like that. And maybe that'll be the next impetus for them to change it up is when they have a Winter Classic. But I hope they keep the Centennial jerseys for a while. Could the Bruins be in contention for John Tavares? I mean, I don't think he's the type of player that's really going to, like, he would obviously help them. There's no question about it. He's a good player. He's, a center. He's a guy that's kind of, could still be a top six, even though I think he's aging out of, like, a consistent top six all the time, like, share the heavy workload that they're looking for somebody to share being a top six center. I think he's coming out of that. I think they would want somebody younger and cheaper, potentially, to start coming into that role, and I think he doesn't quite fit that. I also think I don't think the Bruins in Toronto are going to be dealing for something like that. They don't make many trades, the Leafs and the Bruins, and I don't think they're going to be looking to help out the Leafs in any way, shape, or form with their salary cap issues. So no, I just don't think, because of all the factors involved, I don't think the Bruins would be a guy that a team that Tavares would go to. I just don't think it makes sense. I think there will be better options out there. I'd be surprised if Tavares moved to the Bruins. But, I would never say never, put it that way. But I just don't think, he's the logical guy to go there, given a lot of the other options that they have. And the Leafs would have to take a lot of the cap hit for Tavares in order for that kind of thing to work. So we'll see. I still wonder if Mitch Marner gets traded there, even though the Leafs don't want to do it. They say they're not going to do it. I think that one of the young guys has to get moved, whether it's Nylander, whether it's Marner, somebody. It's not going to be Austin Matthews, obviously. But good question, though. And like I said, I'm going to find out about the Centennial jerseys and get back to you on that. Should Louder Than Yuri asks, should Don go all in for Draisaitl? Okay, I've gotten a lot of Leon Draisaitl questions. He makes much more sense than Tavares as far as I'm concerned. All factors involved. If the Oilers are looking to switch things up, change up the DNA of their team, get some salary cap relief. If Draisaitl wants to go someplace else, perhaps, he's a great player. I think he'd be exactly what the Bruins are looking for. Obviously, I don't think he's the best defensive player in the world. He's not the greatest two-way center in the world. He's gotten better, but I still don't think he's where he would need to be if he's going to play for a team like the Bruins. And that would be sort of a concern or something that I would be watching pretty closely. But you're also talking about one of the elite offensive players in the world, and somebody that is absolutely going to bring more scoring to the table for the Bruins, absolutely would upgrade their top six center situation in a huge way and give them that frontline center that they've needed for a long time. Like all of that stuff, he makes a ton of sense. The question is, what's it going to cost? What are you going to have to give up to get Leon Draisaitl? And it's going to be a lot. Like you're going to have to give up it again, like I was talking about with great Brady Tkachuk, Pastrnak, McAvoy, Jeremy Swayman. Like I don't think Jake DeBrusk. I mean, the rights to Jake DeBrusk, Linus Ullmark, a first-round pick, and like Matt Patra are going to do it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think a package like that is going to get you Leon Draisaitl. Maybe it would. Maybe you could give away something like that and get a player like Draisaitl back if he wanted out, and he let it be known where he wanted to go, and Boston was one of those places. Like, I guess that maybe that could happen, but it's going to have to be if the Bruins are going to get it done and bring Draisaitl to Boston, it's going to have to be because Draisaitl really wants to go to Boston, and he's kind of pushing. He's the engine that's pushing to make that happen. I just don't think. I don't think that. I just don't think it's realistic. I don't know if they don't have the prospects in the first round picks to really pull that off, and I just don't think. I don't think they want to give up the players they're going to have to give up in order to get them. Like that's the one thing that would make me pause about Brady Tkachuk. And it's funny that I would more readily give up like some of those players for Brady Tkachuk than I would for Leon Draisaitl, but I think I would. I think I would for a 24-year-old that power forward type like that Brady Tkachuk is that could change the complexion of your team. Maybe I'm crazy for thinking that way. Maybe I just like power forwards too much and like guys that play a rough style too much, a physical, heavy, rough style. Maybe I value that too much in the playoffs. I don't know. But I just think realistically, I don't know that the Bruins are going to have enough to get that, make that trade happen as much as some others teams would have it to make it happen. The one thing they have is the salary cap space. Like that is going to be the equalizer for a lot of things and make them a player for a lot of different things. Around the league is that they have the salary cap space to make these kind of things happen. So I guess stay tuned on the Draisaitl, but I don't know. That one, of all the names that people throw at me and say, hey, what do you think about the Bruins with this? Draisaitl is the one where I'm like, I just don't see it. I don't see the possibility of it happening. But I guess it could. Just because they have some needs that the Bruins could fill. But like I don't see how you could get Draisaitl and not have to give up one of your best players, one of your 2 or 3 best players in your team. Which, for my money right now, based on age, contract, like all that stuff, is Pastrnak, McAvoy, Swayman. Like Marchand is obviously in that conversation too, but he's a little older now, and that's why I would put him maybe a rung below those other ones because those other guys I think have the most value around the league, given their age, given their performance level, given where they're going to be able to maintain that for the next 5 years, like all that stuff. And I wouldn't trade any of them, I don't think, for Draisaitl. All right, next one. Hi, Joe. I heard the Bees recently made some coaching changes. Can you please give your thoughts on what is changing for the coaching staff this year and what those changes mean for Jim Montgomery and Bob Asenza's future? Thank you. Love the podcast, Roger Perry. Yeah, like I said, the coaching changes I addressed earlier, I think Jay Leach in some ways gives the Bruins an option of a head coaching candidate in-house on their staff were it to ever come to a point where they wanted to make a move with the head coach. I don't see that happening. I think Jim Montgomery's done a great job. I just think it gives them, like, not only does it give them that, it gives them an excellent assistant coach that's going to help and upgrade, I think, from what they had last year, which is the bottom line. But I think you'd be just in denial if you didn't mention the other part of it, that the Bruins thought of Jay Leach as a candidate when they were looking for a head coach, that he was with the organization for a long time, that he's highly respected and thought of by the Boston Bruins and viewed by the Boston Bruins as a future NHL head coach. So given all that stuff, like, you have to admit that and talk about that and just say that it is what it is. But as far as Bob Asenza goes, like, I think Bob Asenza, like, has done a really good job. Like, the Bruins goaltending has continuously been outstanding. they've had some great goaltenders roll through here over the last 15 years or so, continuously. So, like, I don't know that you can really be too critical of Bob Essenza or the job that he's done based on the goaltending production that they get, the results that they get, and how good their goalies have been. And, obviously a lot of the credit goes to the goalies, and you can't say it's all the goalie coach, because I wouldn't say that about Bob Essenza or anybody else. But, like, I think you can't argue with the results that he's gotten and how good he's been. So I don't know why you would lump him in there about his future. Like, obviously he may get to a point where he wants to retire and doesn't want to travel all the time and be there every single day, but I don't know that he's at that point right now. And they all rave. The goalies, talk fondly about goalie Bob and the job that he's done. And, like, the only area I think in the last few years where I would question goalie Bob at all is staying too long with Linus a couple of years ago, staying too long with Tuukka a couple of years before that when he was hurt. Not going with Swayman in a couple of instances where they probably should have, which they obviously reversed this past season where, they each got a start and then they rode Swayman and we saw what he was able to do. But I do think, like, that was the one only nitpicky thing I saw was in the playoffs that he probably needed to be more willing to change out the guy that was the sort of established number one guy. If, like, that player was hurt, wasn't playing up to the level, something was wrong there, whether it was mentally or physically, where they needed to switch it up, and they were hesitant to do that. But they went in with a plan this postseason. It worked really well. I don't know that you can be really critical of that in any way, shape, or form. So the changes, what do they mean for Jim Montgomery? I just think he's now, and I think this was going to be the case regardless of who was on the staff, that I think there's a little more pressure on him this year, going into this year, to continue to build and improve. Like, I think it was, they had a great regular season last year. He's had two very good regular seasons. They won a playoff series this past spring, which was a big hurdle to get over for him, based on, going out in the first round the year before and really disappointing. So they built or took a step as far as the postseason goes, but they need to take another step this postseason. And it goes hand in hand with the players that Don Sweeney brings in and improving the roster, because, that the struggles that they had scoring goals in the playoffs was not Jim Montgomery's fault. It was more the fault of, like, not having enough primary scorers, not having enough guys that could make it happen offensively, not having enough people that play a playoff style that can be effective, that, as Cam Neely simply said, that wanted the puck against Florida in the second round. There weren't enough players that wanted the puck and needed the puck against a team that was going to continuously punch you in the mouth for the entire series until it was over one way or the other. So, it's on Bruins management to get more players like that and to bring in more players like that. But so the bottom line is, I think the coaching changes aren't going to change anything radically, aside from, I think there's going to be this will probably be the first year there will be some level of external pressure on Jim Montgomery that the results need to continue. Things like the too many men on the ice needs to be cleaned up. Some of the things offensively that are going on need to be cleaned up and improved. The defensemen, the young players need to continue to develop. Like, it's going to be a big year for Mason Lohrei, and I think that's part of the reason Jay Leach is going to be a good difference maker on this team. Is somebody like Lohrei, I think he's going to work with very closely, and I think you'll see great results. He's been very good working with defensemen traditionally. So I think that'll be a big thing too, having him on staff for that. But I just think in general, going into the third year for a head coach, it starts to become really ramped up, expectations-wise, pressure-wise, all that stuff. And it'll be that way for Jim Montgomery, and as it should be. If the Bruins are throwing in all the assets and throwing in all the money and going all in with the salary cap space and building up what they believe is going to be a championship roster, it's up to the coach to get it out of them, and that will continue to be the case. But that's all for this week. Thank you very much for all the mailbag questions. They were fantastic. Thanks for listening to the mailbag episode. We appreciate it. We'll see you at the rink.